and welcome to our webinar today. It's really good to have you with us. We're just keeping an eye on the participants' numbers and it's going up very, very quickly. So we'll just give it another few moments to have everybody on board. But it's really good to see you this morning. And thank you very much for giving up an hour of your time, or 45 minutes. We hope we'll try and keep it to 45 minutes if we can. We're going to have a really interesting discussion today about unprecedented leadership for unprecedented times. And we're going to have a really interesting discussion with our special guest today, Hannah Tudor, who's a very experienced head teacher who has obviously been running a school during the last few weeks and months. And I'm sure it's been tremendously challenging, but Hannah is filled with optimism. And I think we're going to have a great discussion about how it's been, how it's gone for both Hannah and her colleagues and students, and what the future looks like, and what September looks like, and how we're going to get there. So we're going to have a really interesting discussion. During this webinar, you're very welcome to join in the chat. Please do. Please click on the chat button and you can share your comments with us. I'd love to hear from you. And also you can ask a question. We're hoping to save some time at the end for some questions. So click on the Q&A button and you'll be able to ask your question for Hannah, and I'll pose your question straight to Hannah. If we don't get a chance to answer all the questions, we'll certainly try our absolute hardest to do it. Hopefully today, in the coming days, I'll be posing those questions to Hannah and hopefully we can get back to you soon. So thank you ever so much for joining. If you'd like to register your interest in the Pathway program from the NAHT and Discovery Education, then please do. The URL is there and we'll be sharing that in the chat stream during the webinar, so you can click on it and go straight there. You may hear us mention Pathway just briefly in the next few moments, but at the very end, if you have time, I'll do a quick 5-minute walkthrough of the Pathway platform so that I can show you exactly what we'll be launching in schools in September. And it's a new program supporting teachers' personal and professional development, the whole teacher, if you like. And with that in mind, the hashtag the whole teacher is what we're using on social media, on Twitter and LinkedIn and everywhere else. So if you'd like to join in the conversation on social media about the whole teacher, about how we support and celebrate the whole teacher in education, then please do so and use that hashtag. Well, it only remains now, I think, for me to say welcome, Hannah. It's good to have you with us.
Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning. Really good to have you there. It looks like it's sunny there. It's rather rainy here in Manchester, but does it sound sunny there?
Ish. We're ever optimistic.
Well, that's you, isn't it? We'll settle for the glass half full, most certainly. Well, it's really good to have you with us, Hannah, and thank you so much as a practicing head teacher to be able to give up 45 minutes of your time on a weekday. We're truly grateful for that, and thank you ever so much. So before we get on to a few questions that we have for you, perhaps you could just spend a minute or two telling us about your career and how you've ended up doing what you're doing today.
So I've been in primary school teaching for 19 years, always been in primary, have always taught in Kent. I was in the classroom for quite a while, and then I went into work for the local authorities consultancy, supporting teachers in classrooms to close gaps and all sorts of things. Did that for a little while and then decided that I would go into school leadership, had 3 deputy head posts, and then arrived at St Mary of Charity in 2014. So it's been my first headship, and it's been an interesting one.
And you're still there and you're flourishing.
I'm still there.
No easy task, no easy task. Gosh, thank you very much. Well, why don't we get straight into the questions, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some questions from the many people attending this webinar. So you've written a really interesting piece on the NAHT Hub. If those watching have not seen that yet, please do check out the NAHT Hub. And there's a splendid piece from Hannah there about unprecedented leadership in these unprecedented times. And Hannah, I'm struck by, well, many things that you've said in that piece, but one of them really strikes home, or it struck home with me, which is you've said never before has there been a more important time for leaders to be the most human that they can be. I wonder if you'd like to expand on that. It's an interesting thought.
It is, and I think about it in 2 different ways. Firstly, I think schools coming back from this crisis need to be led by people who want to understand how this crisis has affected their school and their school community, from governors to teachers to children to parents. Everybody has been affected in some way. There will be teachers coming back who feel anxious, there will be parents coming back who feel anxious, and I think as leaders we need to be getting to know on an emotional level how our school community has been affected. And I don't think that now is the right time for heads to be in offices looking at data or writing catch-up plans, a little bit controversial there, when they should be out in their school community, talking, finding out people's experiences, and I think that's really important. I don't think now is the time to be in an office with data. I think now is the time to make it about people. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, I think it's really important on a human level that head teachers remember their own humanity. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be vulnerable. We don't have all the answers. None of us do. And I don't think we should be expected to have. And I think it's really important to be able to say, I don't have the answers, and to be human too. And I don't think we should be afraid of being human in our schools.
Absolutely, absolutely. There'll be many people on this really recognising that sentiment, actually. I think it requires courage to say that, actually, doesn't it? I've often heard in the last few weeks the notion of children falling behind.
Mm-hmm.
One wonders, falling behind who?
Yes.
But I totally understand this need to be out of the office and to be managing and supporting people, and that's an essential part of the role. Thank you. We could talk about that particular question all day, couldn't we? But I've got another one. How important do you think it is in your role, both now and moving forward, to understand how others have viewed this lockdown? What has their experience been? And do you think it's important for you to be able to put yourself in others' shoes? Because people do it in different ways, don't they?
Absolutely. I think if we don't do that as leaders, we won't get this right. So I think because of various constraints and situations that people find themselves in, we can't just be looking at our team of teachers. We need to be understanding, who's a mum and needs to be able to pick up their children on time from school? Who's the person who's looking after elderly relatives at home? Who may have been shielding during lockdown? Who may have, experienced this horrendous disease on a personal level of someone that they love? And unless we take the time to get to know those things, we're not going to get this quite right for everybody. Because I don't want a teacher in a classroom thinking, but I need to be picking my children up and I'm here and that's causing me huge amount of anxiety. We need to understand, as we said, they are unprecedented times. We need to lead very differently, and we need to find out how these unprecedented times are affecting the people that we are working with. And also the wider community. How has it affected our parents? And in terms affected the children that will be coming back. So on every level, we need to understand how this has affected those around us. Definitely. I don't think we're going to get it right if we don't do that.
Well, I think a fundamental part, maybe, I hope you agree, of every school's culture and ethos really is about providing equal access to learning, isn't it? And ensuring parity of provision across the school. I think that's a really important part of every school's ethos, really. Has that been a frustration for you recently when perhaps you've been unable to offer that parity, that equal access that you obviously would normally hold so dear? How have you managed to address that?
Oh, I think that's been a huge frustration. The biggest frustration is that we as leaders and everybody tuning in today will feel that we're about every child, every family, every teacher. And suddenly, for the last term, we haven't been about every child. We've been about the children who somebody has deemed have been able to come back to school, and that's not everyone. And as much as we understand that we can't have everyone back, I don't entirely understand the thinking behind the children that can come back and those that can't. And it's very difficult to explore that with our team when naturally our teachers say, well, why? Why can those year groups come back and not the other children? And that's been a real challenge for me, is that it's such a part of who we are that we provide equality for everybody, and now suddenly we haven't been able to do that. But equally as much, we work tirelessly as leaders to make sure that it's fair for the staff as well. So we were put in this really difficult position where we're suddenly saying, well, you're the year 6 teachers, so it's back to work for you on the 1st of June, everybody else work from home. And that didn't sit right with me either. So we had to think about how we manage staff's expectations of that situation, because when we come out of the other side, and we will, we need to make sure that we understand that equality is really important to us, and I don't want to have built any resentment in this difficult time, so people think, well, that really wasn't very fair, what she did there. So you're constantly questioning, how do we manage this for fairness and equality? And that has been a challenge. But optimistically, moving forward, we really value equality now because it's been taken away. So we really understand how much that is important to us. And I think come September, if things all go to plan, we will be back to being every child, every teacher, every parent, you know, and that kind of equality.
That's really interesting, Hannah, and I suspect a lot of head teachers and leaders on this call will recognise that ambition and recognise the fact that in the last few weeks and months, I suspect that some of the core elements, some of the fundamental building blocks, if you like, of the architecture of your culture, of your ethos, have really been put in sharp focus now. Not least because the challenges in delivering on those values, but those values, I think from what you're saying, will be even more important to you in September. Is that right? Is that what I'm hearing? That it'll be
absolutely.
School culture,
absolutely. And I think optimistically, it's a huge chance to reflect and think and challenge ourselves. And maybe now is not quite the right time, but as we move further out of what has been an incredibly challenging time, I think I've been tested more than I've ever been. And so coming out of this time, we'll have a chance to really see in sharp focus what is important and equally what isn't important, and reshape where we're perhaps going next.
That perspective. So how about you, if you don't mind? What have been some of your challenges as a head in these last few weeks, and how have you managed to look after yourself, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I've hidden the gin bottles, so I've hidden them out of the view of the background. I always say that I try to have just enough answers to be credible as a head, but not profess to have all of them. And so I'm really lucky in that I have a great team that I'm able to say, what are we going to do? What do we do about this? But also those informal networks that are so important to me around, you know, other head teachers in the area, a text, a phone call, a sense of humour, really, really important. But I know over the last sort of 5 weeks, I've absorbed a lot of other people's anxiety, teachers, parents, children, you know, and I can feel that and I know that. And so it's really important that we have those collaboration networks to be able to offload and understand that that's the stuff that gets you down, really. It's not the writing of the school improvement plans, it's that absorbing of emotion and taking on board other people's feelings and challenges and upset, really. And that for me has been the challenge. So I think in terms of looking after myself, keeping a sense of humour, really staying on to the fact that this isn't going to be forever. We will get through this. It's not going to be like this forever. And keeping those networks going that are so important in the job that we do.
Fabulous. Thank you. Some lessons there for everybody. It's so interesting and so cathartic listening to how you've coped with what's happened, really, and how you've remained positive. The idea that we're a sponge, isn't it, soaking up as much as we can, absorbing other people's anxiety is just what we do, isn't it? It's our default setting, and that's meant that we've had so much to absorb in the last few weeks that we need to look after ourselves. Do you know, it strikes me that two of the most important things school leaders need in their role. Certainly, I've been was in education in schools for 21 years, including headship of a couple of schools, and I felt that there were two things that I really needed. One was certainty, just like the banks need certainty, schools need certainty, and another was control. To be honest, a feeling of agency, feeling that you have some control. And the lockdown, it seems to me, has threatened both of these elements of certainty and control. Do you agree? And how have you coped with so much uncertainty and perhaps a lack of control at times? How have you addressed that?
I completely agree. I think the comfort is that we, at the moment, a small comfort is that we don't have certainty, but nobody does. So I'm uncomfortable when I'm not certain and everyone around me seems very certain. You know, at the moment, nobody has that certainty. And so the lack of certainty changes the type of leader that you are. I know certainly in my school, staff have looked and thought, what are we doing? And there comes a point when you have to take control, even though you don't have any, you have to take control and say, this is what we're going to do. And take that kind of deep breath and take that leap of faith. And I think once we say we're going to do this, staff then follow you because they also have that uncertainty. I've always been taught that if you're out of control, there is something around you that you can control. And so it's looking for the fact that there are still certain things that we can control in our schools. We control the ethos and we control the culture. And that ethos and culture will either breed more anxiety or it will lessen that anxiety. And we started this process and the training that we gave to staff with the fact that, you know, we didn't want our culture and ethos to change so that children were constantly being told what they couldn't do. Let's be creative and give them the skills to understand what they can. So we controlled our ethos and we controlled our culture very closely. But absolutely, we you know, I'm not certain, I don't know what's going to happen. And no sooner am I certain what's going to happen on the 1st of June than September comes up and I'm uncertain again. So I think everyone is in the same boat. And I think all we can do is hold on to what we believe in and make decisions that we think are right at the time based on the knowledge that we have, because doing nothing isn't an option. So we have to do something.
Absolutely. I was really interested in one of the things you said earlier, which is that you have to at least find some things that you can control, some things that you can actually have some influence over, and really focus on those. And I suppose that will help your well-being and your agency, won't it? And it will also reassure others that you've still got the helm, you've still got the wheel, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, completely.
And you say also in your article, which is a great read for those who've just joined us. Hannah's done a terrific article on the NHT Hub, worth visiting the NHT Hub, lots of different articles on there. And there's a cracking piece from Hannah there. And in it, actually, Hannah, you also say that we're all in the sea together and collaboration has never been so important. Would you like to expand on that, perhaps? And how have you used your networks and contacts to stay afloat?
I do agree with that. I think, you know, my article I talked about all being in the sea together, but we are in different boats. And I think each school is in a different boat. I have full admiration for secondary school head teachers at the moment. I cannot begin to imagine. I've got 7 classes to sort out, and sometimes, you know, that's proving a real challenge. So, you know, we are very much in different boats, but that doesn't mean to say we can't join together. And if ever there was a time to join together, it's now. And I think I've always valued collaboration. I don't necessarily know if we've entirely gone about it in the right way until now. I think sometimes it's been perhaps overly forced, but I do think that collaboration is important and more so now than ever. And I think at the moment, collaboration for me is quite informal. It's a text, it's a phone call, it's a, oh my goodness, you know, what are you doing about bubbles in year 6? And what are you doing about phonics next year? And all of those things. And I never underestimate that. That is so important. And we've got to work together to understand we all face the same challenges, but we've just got to put them into different contexts. And if we're all doing that on our own, then we really have got something wrong. We've missed a trick. And I think after this, we will value collaboration more than we've ever done before. I know I certainly will, because we are all in it together.
Amen to that. Completely agree. Again, it's another one of those core values that's going to be really important when we come back, now that we've had that perspective, I suppose. Here's an interesting one. Knowing, as I do, that you have a passion for creativity and innovation. Every leader does. Creativity and innovation are important, I think, to every school leader, and I know that these motivate you especially. How have you managed to retain your creative vision at the same time as, well, frankly, having to play it safe and manage every risk very carefully? Do you see a contradiction there at the moment? How have you managed to still be bold and creative at the same time as being understandably cautious and checking those risks very carefully?
Yes, it's been very frustrating, Andrew. It's been very frustrating. We do have to play it safe. We have to work within those protective measures. That is about safety for everyone. That is non-negotiable. That is the most important thing. I wouldn't say my vision has become any more creative, but I would say that as a school, we've put our vision into place with more creativity at this time. We've used our values, we've used our vision, and there are certain things that we will be saying, and I will be saying, that is not right for us. So one being, you know, the latest announcement of more English and maths at perhaps the detriment of a broader curriculum. That won't be right for us. That's not something that I will be doing, because it goes against our vision and our values. So we will be looking at keeping what our vision is, but we will be implementing it more creatively, I think, because the times are more challenging. I don't think now is the right time for innovation. I would love to hear if people sort of disagree with me on that. I'm very much an ideas person, so endless rotas about staggering lunchtime are slowly kind of strangling the life out of me. I love lots of ideas of doing things differently and coming up with different things, but I recognise that now is not the time. We will have that time, I think, and the way that schools choose to move forward from this will be incredibly innovative and really exciting. But I don't think that time is now. I think it's about sticking with what we value, what we believe, what we hold dear in a very restrictive working environment is where we are at the moment. But I think the optimism of that is our vision and values have been challenged to the hilt this term and since March the 20th, and we've absolutely stuck by them. And I think if schools have done that and schools continue to do that, this will be the ultimate test if the values and vision are right in your school, because if you're ditching them now, they're not right. They're not right. So it's about us knowing that we really do have the right vision and values to move forward. But in terms of innovation, I'm not entirely sure we're at the right time yet. I think we need to play it safe for a while, creatively, but we need to play it safe.
We've had chats and comments coming in about this particular piece, actually, which is really interesting, and I'll try and pose lots of different questions to you at the end. But interesting comment from Elaine, actually. Our curriculum is within our control. We're able to put whatever we feel our children need. We can sway the content as we see fit.
Absolutely.
Classes should have at least an hour a day to develop emotional and mental health. This is developing. I think there's part of a debate. There's a debate going on at the moment, isn't there? There's a really interesting. It's kind of prompted everybody. This new perspective that we have has prompted a lot of leaders looking at lots of different chats on here, which I'm sure you'll see at the end. A lot of people are getting around the idea now that now is perhaps the time for a really deep think about the curriculum and the different subjects that you'll be offering when you return. So maybe we'll come on to that at the very end of this session. There's a few questions around curriculum. So thank you, everybody, for really engaging around that particular topic. And I know Hannah has lots of thoughts on that. So we'll drill into that a little bit more at the end if we can. A couple more, actually, before we get to questions from the attendees. I've been delighted to work with you on the Pathway programme. Would you like to just tell us a little bit about your particular course within Pathway? And then generally we can talk about Pathway, because you've got a cracking course coming up that you're authoring and that you're filming with us on Monday, actually.
That's right.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey at your school? And what?
Okay, so my school has, I've had the joy of working in a school that has gone from an inadequate Ofsted judgment to an outstanding one in 4 years and 1 week, to be precise. And whilst that has been hugely positive, it has challenged me as a leader, and I have found myself more challenged when the school has performed well than I did when perhaps the school wasn't performing as well. And so my course explores that, about how we build momentum and innovation and risk-taking within a team to improve a school, but then how we maintain that thinking when everyone else around us is telling us we've done it. So we don't think we've done it yet. There's still lots of things that we want to do, but we're managing lots of different people's expectations and perceptions of the school. And I've interestingly found myself personally more challenged by carrying a label of outstanding than I did when it carried a label of inadequate. Perhaps that says more about me, I don't know. But the course explores that, and it explores how perhaps my leadership has changed and how I've had to be really conscious of not being swayed by perhaps other people's views that maybe aren't my own.
I think it's a really interesting. We've done all the reading materials and we're doing the filming next week, and I've been reading all of those different materials, and it's really insightful and really empowering, actually, in this idea of working with staff and encouraging them to become even more embracing of change and innovation, and almost to the point where one creates those sort of change addicts. And what do you do next? What do you do next when the definition of your school, if you like, it's been judged to be outstanding? So it's such an interesting journey that you're on, and such an interesting challenge to now maintain that level of that momentum, that motivation, still moving forwards, and always evolving. But I know you're very modest and you're very humble about the label of having an outstanding school. And I know you're refreshingly modest about that when we've spoken about it in the past. So it'd be excruciating for you to talk about it now, I'm sure. But it's a really interesting course that you're writing. Why do you think Discovery Education Pathway generally is so needed at the moment? What elements in it attracted you to joining it as a contributor?
I think that Pathway is it's a very innovative framework, and I think it will result in teachers being brought together with a degree of kind of leadership and focus, which is where sometimes collaboration, I think, doesn't sustain itself because there isn't that leadership and focus to it. I think it will have that focus to share, to talk, to reflect, to challenge each other, to disagree with each other. And it's not about, as traditional CPD has always been, one person knowing and another person learning. It's about everybody learning and reflecting and being openly honest about the things that have challenged them, and maybe they've learned from, and maybe they're still learning from, and maybe they're yet to learn from. But I think that if we sort of all learn together, the fact that Pathway prioritises personal development, it's that growth in personal development that means that as heads we are going to be stronger coming out of these times than we ever were when we went in. And we need to really harness that personal development to be able to do what is right for the children in our school and prioritise what we think those needs are. And I think Pathway will really support us to do that, because it does have, as we've said earlier, the whole teacher at the core of what it's about.
Yeah, thank you. Couldn't agree more. It's about the whole teacher. Excellent teaching is about the whole child, isn't it? So professional development is about the whole teacher, and it needs to be. It really is. Many of the time I've come out of a CPD and thought, well, he knows it and I don't, and the people on my table clearly know it a little better than I do, and it doesn't do much for your well-being or your sense of empowerment in agency. Yeah. So it's got to be about the whole person. So thank you for that, Anne. Should we try some questions? So this gets really interesting because neither of us know what these questions are. So, but I'm sure we're going to get some cracking answers here from you. So let's share some of these. Some concern. This is from Aaron. Some concerns in my school where we've asked some staff to come in to deliver live lessons rather than doing this at home. The rationale here revolves around crossing the threshold for staff and re-establishing some sense of community. Any thoughts around that? Yeah, I can see some challenges within that. So some concerns in my school where we've asked some staff to come in to deliver live lessons rather than doing this at home. And the rationale here revolves around crossing the threshold for staff and re-establishing a sense of community. Yeah, rather than just delivering all those lessons at home. Any thoughts around that? I
think that's really challenging. And I presume from that we're talking about staff who are anxious to come into school. And that kind of goes back to the point that we were talking about earlier, Andrew, in that we have to, as leaders, go to our staff and say, talk to me about the anxiety, because crossing the threshold is going to come at some point, whether we like it or not. And as much as that is very challenging, we need to nurture our staff, but we also need to challenge them to be able to take that step. And it is hugely difficult, but I think it's about levelling and saying, and that's where the absorbing of some of that anxiety comes from. Because if we don't take the leap soon, we've got to do it at some stage. And from what I'm seeing that's coming kind of thick and fast is that it's going to be slightly easier to do it now than it is going to be doing it in September, where by the looks of things, it's all going to get far busier. So my view would, I absolutely agree with what you're doing. At some point, you have to get teachers back. We have to get teachers back, and we have to try and understand the barriers to teachers returning to the classroom and listen to them and hold them generally, but actually understand that we need to get teachers back.
Do you know, I couldn't agree more, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call will also agree, but let's look at it from a different angle here. An interesting question from Tony. This is looking at it from the opposite direction, really, which is, in a way, how important do you think it will be to maintain this type of technology that we're using right now today to support colleagues and maintain social distancing moving forward? So do you see a greater role for technology like this when we go back?
We've talked about this at school, because there's certain meetings between you and I and everyone else watching that last a fraction of the time if they're done online to when we call everyone into school. I think that we will harness certain things that back in March we were saying, oh my goodness, we don't want to do this. And I think we will harness it. And I think there is a place for technology to make things more efficient. Stop people travelling to lots of different meetings and making things more efficient. We shall see. I hope so.
Okay, so thank you very much. Some really, really interesting questions. We are in the midst of what looks like a fire alarm. Nobody could have predicted it. But I just wanted to thank you so much, Hannah. I've got lots of different questions to ask you, but we do need to exit just now. I would strongly suggest that people stick around, and I hope that in a few minutes' time we'll be able to continue. But clearly, for the sake of your eardrums, I'm going to pause now, take a break, and if you can join us again in a few minutes, I hope we can have a few more questions from Hannah and then a quick walk through the pathway program. But right now, I think I need to be outside. Oh, it's stopped. It's stopped. Let's continue. Let's continue. It's never dull here in Manchester. Well, actually, that's a contradiction, isn't it, in itself? But forgive me, the weather's a little bit dull today. But well, we survived so far, and unless I'm actually literally physically removed from the building, I'm going to keep going, as we leaders do. So some really interesting questions there. Thank you very much for those answers. Let's have a look at a few more. So, oh, that's an interesting one from Deborah now, which is, how do you find out about how families are at the moment?
Oh, that is interesting. I mean, this is going to be different based on school context, because we're a small primary school. So we have set up various means we set up an email address. We have a seesaw program that runs between home and school for parents and children to comment to the teacher. We have our pastoral support team phoning parents that we are a little bit concerned about. So we've maintained contact throughout the lockdown, but I appreciate that's easier for us in a primary school than that would be in a secondary school or a large primary school. So we have maintained that, and now as children come back to school, we make sure senior staff are on the gate every morning, even if it is just to say 2 meters, 2 meters, constantly over and over again. But we've maintained that kind of link, and it's important. People's circumstances are changing all the time.
I've had a really interesting, more a comment really, but I'm going to share it, see if you have any thoughts on it, from Catherine actually. Catherine, thank you so much for your honesty in posting this comment. I'm sure that a lot of people might feel this, which is that lockdown has made me realise how little work-life balance I had, or I have. And although there have been stresses, I've actually felt like the pressure has been taken away somewhat, and I felt a lot better. Ofsted, SATs, moderation, etc., not here right now. Planning, marking has been less for teachers. Do you think there will be staff who struggle with the demands of the job when things return to normal? And how can we support as that pressure returns? Catherine, that's a really interesting point. Thank you.
Really interesting. I completely agree. And I think it's been interesting how, you know, going back to my first point in terms of your answer to your first question, Andrew, which is that we are being given the opportunity to be that leader now. We don't have to be preparing for Ofsted inspections. We don't have to be looking at SATs results. We don't have to be preparing to report SATs to governors and parents and everything else. We can be that leader that we want to be. And it's hugely refreshing to have that opportunity. And I think, you know, there will be hopefully some innovative things that come from this, which is really when we question, do we need some of these things, and how do we perhaps get really bogged down in them when were we too bogged down in them before? So I think it's absolutely right, Catherine, a great point in that we've had almost chance to press the pause button on our schools and take a step back and think, how do we now rebuild moving forward? And that is going to take strength. That is going to take huge strength, but that's why we're better in it together.
So I've had another yes, so how are you preparing for a second spike? My goodness,
I'm not. I'm burying my head in the sand on that one. I just want to go to all the beaches and go home, go home. I don't know. I really don't know. And I think I've learned through this whole process that I'm more resilient than I knew I was. And so I didn't really prepare for closure on the 20th of March. I said in my article, I cried in front of all of the staff, and I found it very upsetting. And for me, the words that really upset me were "until further notice." That's what I really struggled with, going back to your point, Andrew, about uncertainty and control. I really found that difficult. So I'm fairly confident, as much as the second spike would be awful, I'm confident that we will do what we need to do, and we will continue to keep hold of what is right for us to be able to come through it. I'm desperately hoping, as we all are, that we won't be in that position. I don't have any control about it if we are in that position. I think we will just have to navigate it when it comes, and hopefully we'll all be in it together, and we'll be stronger as a result of this time that we're going through now to be able to manage a second spike, I hope.
I hope you're right, and I'm sure you're right, actually. We've learned so much. We've had such we've gained a perspective here that we hadn't had before, which has given us a stronger core in a way, hasn't it, really? Notwithstanding tremendous challenges that have been. September, I think, will come back stronger. Here's an interesting one from Shanaz. Do you envisage the full national curriculum being taught in the first term or half term in September? That's an interesting one.
Interesting question. I have this real issue, and we've touched on it briefly, Andrew. I have this real issue about children falling behind, constantly being told children are behind. Behind what is the first question, behind who? And also, children are behind, or we perceive they're behind, when we've taught them things well and they haven't learnt them. These children haven't been taught them. So we can readjust that, but we will not close that gap in whatever area we need to close that gap in if we have anxious, doubtful, worried children. And we need to work on resilience and managing, self-doubt and lack of self-belief. These children have constantly been told they'll be behind when they come back to school. So that first term, I think going back to kind of an original point that was made, is that we can really harness what's right for our children. And that might be a full curriculum. Won't it be great if it is? But it might be for us to say, well, actually, we're putting PSHE or right front and centre of everything that we do, and we'll build from there. And I think that's going to be great. I think if schools think we will deliver the curriculum that we deem is right for our children, that will give them what they need for term one to be able to accelerate their progress moving forward, I think that will be brilliant, and I think that's where our innovation will come from.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm excited to hear you say that. I think there's always, certainly in the 20 years I've had in schools, there's always been, in my mind at least, there's always been an invisible curriculum reflected almost like in a lake beneath the visible curriculum of English, maths, science, history, and so forth. And what I think is very interesting is that in September, we may well find that invisible curriculum that's reflected beneath it is actually the thing that's in sharp focus. And the visible curriculum will actually seem a little bit more abstract than it was before. And the reality is actually going to be the invisible curriculum of attitudes, behaviours.
Yes.
Does that sound familiar to you? Is that?
Completely. And I think the first thing we need to be thinking about is it sounds cliche, but some sort of team building, relationship building. These children have been apart for a long time, and we're bringing them back as a class of 30, and so in some instances more. And we need to reconnect, and we need to rebuild those relationships, both as staff to children and children to children. It's so important, and it will be those things that children go home from school and say, I've had a brilliant day at school today, and parents' anxiety will then lessen about their children going back. If we start to give them huge amounts of English and maths, the gap will widen. I'm absolutely convinced of it, because I think if children are anxious, we need to address that first, and we need to kind of be addressing, as you say, those hidden skills and attitudes first, and getting them right to be able to move forward.
Well, I think it's Philip Larkin who wrote a poem on an ode to Satchmo, I think, actually, an ode to Louis Armstrong. And in it he says, your music hits me like a giant yes. Your words have hit me like a giant yes this morning. And I think there's a lot of people on this call will go, yes, and I've been reading the chat stream. And I think a lot of us, myself included, have got an awful lot out of this 30 minutes. And we could talk to you all day. So if you haven't yet seen Hannah's piece on the NAHT Hub, please do. It's filled with some really interesting wisdom, and it's most reassuring. And I'm reassured that Hannah is actually contributing the most amazing online course as part of Pathway. So I'm going to just walk people through Pathway for 5 minutes now at the end, if people can join us. But for now, Hannah, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really, really interesting listening to you. And I do hope we can do this again soon. Why don't we do this again in September when we can find out exactly how it's going? But your vision for September is so rejuvenating for all of us. And thanks again for your time. So please go and have a cup of tea.